Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forever Sports. It is official. Luke Morgan will not be cited for diving onto the back of Ethan Hooker, which caused a shoulder dislocation to the South African winger slash centre, which is set to rule him out to 3 to 4 months. And South Africa has been abuzz on social media with the reactions about the fact that the incident was not only not penalised, it wasn't reviewed by the TMO, it wasn't given a second look, and lots of calls for it to be cited and for basically post-match action to be taken regarding the incident itself. However, it has been confirmed that the cited commissioner has looked at the incident and said that it does not meet the red or the yellow card threshold, which I think is a bit worrying in terms of the yellow card threshold. And I think probably what's the most worrying is a bit of a lack of remorse across all the parties to even acknowledge that it was an incident, which, as far as the laws are concerned, do seem to point towards it being at the very least a penalty or a yellow card. But there will be no further action, and Luke Morgan will be allowed to play this weekend. Before we get into it, please do smash a like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. So it's been an interesting week. Let's call it that. And lots being said, lots being speculated about. And I think that there's going to be a couple of disclaimers. First of all, there have been reports about attacks against Luke Morgan and his family, which are always unacceptable. You know, regardless of what happens on a sports field, you can't go ask people's families. You know, at the end of the day, this is rugby. At the end of the day, it is a contact sport. At the end of the day, these incidents do happen. And I think that we've got to look at it and we've got to take a step back, remove emotion from it, and kind of look at it a little bit more sort of objectively, and kind of look at intent, for example. You got to look at it in the moment. You got to understand the entire incident, and then understand who's at fault, to what degree they're at fault, and then, you know, you can criticize people, but when you start DMing people and you start attacking families, it crosses a line that we can't really, you know, justify any of the kind of behavior. And I think the biggest problem is that it kind of removes the point. You know, we kind of shift away to what we are speaking about, which is the incident itself. So this was an article put up by Mike Greenway for The Independent, and they had a source from the United Rugby Championship say the following: that the citing officer involved reviewed the incident and found that it did not meet the red or yellow card threshold. Said as follows: said there has been a lot of public discourse about the fixture, and while we certainly understand there are heightened opinion in these circumstances, we must respect the processes that are in place. I think at the end of the day, I don't think it was a red card, and I think that I've always been a big advocate against the fact that you don't base bans on injuries, you know, and you don't base sightings on injuries. And I've always taken exception to the fact that that's even a tick box within the citing commission, because there are incredibly dangerous incidents that happen on a field that don't result in injury. There are perfectly legal incidents that happen that result in major injuries. You know, you can have a perfectly legitimate tackle or clash or scrum. And I mean, for example, Julian Redlingham, Stephen Kitsoff, they had their careers ended by injuries in a scrum. And there's nothing to say that in those scrums there was something intentional by the other player or anything sort of foul play related that caused these injuries. You know, you can have a perfectly legal tackle and break somebody's ribs. You can cause a leg break, and it can be perfectly legal. So just as, you know, you can have a legal incident which results in no injuries, I don't think you should then look at injuries and decide there has to be resultant action, unless the actions are deliberate and are done to cause injury or with the intention of trying to cause harm. And that, for me, is always the big thing. You got to look at the intent. Now, if I look at the incident, I think it's reckless. I think that it is reckless. I think it is a penalty. Yellow card, I think there's a justification towards getting to a yellow card area. I don't think it's a red. I'll be perfectly honest. I don't think it's a red card. I don't think it's necessarily a ban. This is something that should have been dealt with at the time. As soon as it happened, it should have been a penalty. You could argue maybe a yellow card. But I think if you've gone bang penalty, you can't dive on the player. They restart with a penalty. I think most people basically would have gone from there and said, okay, well, it's been sanctioned. The problem now is that no action was taken. They didn't even look at it as a potential penalty. And then what's really inflamed the situation is the fact that it has caused an injury and potentially a longer term injury And it also really doesn't help that it's to Ethan Hooker, which is a young upcoming player. He is a Springbok. He is expected to play, in the games here. So we've now got this kind of like cauldron bubbling of so many different factors that have caused the outrage. I'll be perfectly honest. I think if it was an older player, for example, who wasn't involved in the box and there wasn't an injury, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We would be sitting there saying there should have been a penalty, there should have been some sort of action, but we wouldn't have had the outrage we've had. But the outrage has come for a variety of reasons. First of all, the fact that there was no action taken. And, the fact that they've now looked at it and they haven't acknowledged that there should have been any sort of punishment, I think is really frustrating. Because I think if you look at the laws, you may not dive on a player. I don't think it was done with malice intent. I don't think it was, for example, preconceived. I don't think it was a case of people going as far as saying that he did it to intentionally try and injure him, and now there's conspiracies about they're trying to weaken the box. I don't think it was that far planned ahead. I think it was a player chasing back who was frustrated that he'd gotten away with him and ended up being stupid and diving on the player. Which we have seen happen. I think it is an in the moment thing. I don't think it's a preconceived, this is our opportunity to try and injure Ethan Hooker. I don't think there's that much intent and malice attached to the incident. I think it's a silly incident. I think it's a complete brain fade, and he had a stupid moment, made a stupid action. I think should have been punished for it. But what has not helped has been a lack of accountability from the player, from the URC, and from the Ospreys itself. And now we are shifting the discourse because we have been talking about the fact that, and this says, he's free to play, for example. But the frustrating part and where this is really sort of going is the fact that they have not acknowledged that anything was ever wrong. And in fact, the coaches almost sort of intimated that that's the kind of thing that they want to see regarding the desperation to try and make an effort. At the end of the day, he had no chance of preventing the try. He was well beaten, always well beaten. He was not diving to try and knock the ball out, for example. He had no realistic chance of affecting the try being scored. And therefore, it's careless. And what doesn't help is that Morgan then took to Instagram to basically challenge those who were going after him. And because basically somebody in the comments said that you should be banned as long as Ethan Hooker is out, scumbag. Now, I think that's an overreaction. But I don't think, as I said, I don't think it's necessarily a red card. I don't think it's necessarily a lengthy ban, because I think it's an in the moment stupid moment. Just like, for example, somebody who rides up in a tackle, or has a moment where maybe they go through the horizontal, and ironically those would have been yellow cards. But I don't think we need to look at 6 rule. I mean, we're not going to ban somebody for 3 to 4 months for diving on a player after they scored a try at the end of the day. But the problem is this comment over here, where Morgan says he clearly hasn't scored until the ball is grounded. Therefore, because the ball wasn't grounded, means the ball is still in play, and I'm fully legal to make that tackle. So you might want to think again about that one. And that's what they're basically going with. Now, that's since been deleted, and I think rightly so, because first of all, players should never engage with fans online. It's a futile exercise. Even if you are in the right, which I don't think he is, you're never going to come out looking good. I think this is a complete lack of sensitivity to the fact that a young player has been injured with your careless actions and you are not taking responsibility. If you come out and basically said, frustration got the better of me, I was desperate to try and affect something, looking back on it now, wasn't the right decision, really, really sorry to Ethan and for what's happened. Unfortunately, these things are part of rugby, but I will always try and look to be better. Then everybody basically just shifts the narrative and says, well, fair play. You made a stupid decision. It was a stupid act. You've acknowledged it. You're taking responsibility. We could probably move on. But the fact that they've basically chosen to die on this hill and basically say that he didn't do anything wrong at any point is what is really causing a lot of the anger. And I think there's a lot of the anger is justified, because, again, there isn't any sort of sense of remorse. And that's frustrating, because you've dived on a player carelessly and you've caused a big injury. And at no point have you taken responsibility, at least publicly, which is fine if you've taken responsibility privately. But by the fact that you've now come on into a public forum and basically justified it, means that I don't think there has been any sort of sense of accountability. And then the coach, Mark Jones, said, I've been sent the stuff that Lucas had to deal with, as well as his family. It's a disgrace if people are going to target sportsmen around incidents on a sports field and make it personal, which I think generally it is. He said Luke Morgan is a competitive guy. He's chasing back as hard as he can for his team in what was a tight game. He's done his utmost to do what we ask players to do, which is not give up until the ball is grounded. I think that is also an ill statement, because I think that I get the fact that you want players chasing back, but again, he was never going to affect the try. It had been gone. It was gone. If you've watched the incident, if you watched the try, he was gone. And I understand that you want to basically acknowledge that he sort of did get back, but you can't basically look at somebody diving on a player like that, causing the injury, and say, we expect our players to put this kind of in. But he then said as follows: Hooker's a great player, and unfortunately got injured in that incident, but there's no malice in that challenge. He's a top quality player, and we hope he won't be out for the game for too long, but Luke was just trying his best for his team. Again, there's no remorse. There's no accountability. You know, and I don't think we have to come out there and sit there and say he was competing in the wrong. We acknowledge that, we're going to have an internal review. It's not that big of an incident. But the fact that there is no acknowledgement of, even over there where he said basically, was just trying his best for the team. There's not even a guess the timing wrong, or he made a split decision, might have been the wrong decision, but unfortunately that's the reality of the rugby. Because I think that is the reality of the game. I think that we do microanalyze things too much. I do think that, again, it's something that kind of just happens, as lots of things do happen on a field. And until you're in that moment, until you're in that situation, until you're in that environment, you can't really understand split-second decisions. But I think it's a split-second decision, and he makes the wrong decision. And if he acknowledges that, and if there's a slight acknowledgement of that, then I don't think we get to the stage where we're at. So as usual, I think, your truth in inverted commas, or where I sit, is somewhere in the middle of that we've blown the incident out of proportion. The abuse, especially towards family, is completely unwarranted and gone too far. It's not, however, been helped by the player not taking any responsibility. It's not been helped by the Ospreys not acknowledging it. It's not been helped by the fact that the URC have not even acknowledged that there is a potential penalty there. And I think we continuously get frustrated because we look at the laws, which says you cannot dive on a player after he has scored a try. And then we look at an incident like this and say, but is this not an example of that? And if it is, why is it not being punished? And when they then don't come out and acknowledge that maybe the wrong decision was made through trying to protect referees, we then create this consistent gray area and an ambiguity where we don't know what's going on. We don't know what's on the left, on the right, and what the difference are between incidents, and why this gets punished and that doesn't get punished. I don't really want to go down the rabbit hole about this whole, if he was a South African, he would have been blah, 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 because I really don't want to become conspiracy theorists. Because a lot of people are sitting there saying, well, if you're South African, he would have been banned for this, this, and that. And I hate going down that sort of victim mentality of there's always somebody's always out to get to us. I think sometimes you can sort of see where things are inverted commas, a bias, or maybe is an additional narrative. I don't think that's the case here, but it's just a culmination of factors that have all led up to this boiling over, and now we're with the situation. Fact of the matter is, he is available to play this weekend. We do not know what the extent of Ethan Hooker's injury is. Hopefully, it'll only be maybe 2 months, and he can be back for the Greatest Rivalry Tour, especially because you can then play for the Sharks against the All Blacks and try and use that as a form guide to him getting into the box and hopefully featuring against the All Blacks in what's going to be one of the most iconic series we've had in a long, long time. What are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comments below. Smash a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve, and I'll chat to you soon.